the conversation. This is Afternoon on the Dove. Follow the conversation. This is Afternoon on the Dove.
My special guest today is Pastor Bernie Anderson, and he is from Salt Lake City. He pastors there and has now for several years. And the Seventh-day Adventist Church, there's a fancy name to this thing.
Wasatch Hills.
The Wasatch Hills Church there in Salt Lake City. And he'll be speaking tomorrow at the Grants Pass Adventist Church and giving his story and talking throughout the day as well. So let me encourage you. In fact, he'll be speaking tonight. Starting his testimony tonight. He's written a book called Breaking the Silence. A pastor goes public about his battle with pornography. There's a picture of it there on the screen for those of you watching on the Dove TV. Let me encourage you to get a copy of the book. Where can they get this?
Autumn House. Grab it online, yeah.
Autumn House, okay. And check it out that way. We're talking about the whole battle of this addiction with men and the silence. And I told you during the break, one of the things that I've discovered in the shows that we've done and men that I've talked to, men have this sense of we're the conquerors, we're the protectors, we're the fighters, the hunters. But now there's something in our life that we just don't have control. We really want to be in control. We really want to be on top of life, but this one seems to be something that really has power over us. And I know in my own journey, that was the great struggle with me, is that I could not understand how something could have that much control and power. And especially when you pray, when you're a person of prayer. Where's God? How come he didn't show up and heal you?
Yeah, exactly. Those are the dynamics that are going on in my head. Yet at the same time, I believe that God was telling me or giving me clues as to how you deal with this issue, how you don't allow someone to have something to have this much control over you. But I was unwilling to listen. I think most men go through this life thinking, well, God can just overcome me and take care of this issue.
Right.
Whereas God, I think, has a bigger plan for our lives, because ultimately I don't believe that pornography is the problem. There are underlying, very deep-rooted issues that pornography just sort of helps us mask and deal with. So.
You know the story in Matthew where Jesus sends the disciples out, and they came back, and they'd been ministering in his name, and they did healings, and they did all these wonderful things. Yeah. And he said something that I think for a long time was the cruelest scripture in the Bible. Depart from me, you workers of iniquity, I never knew you. And I thought, what a cruel thing to say to people out ministering in his behalf, until I looked up the word iniquity. And the word iniquity means concealed sin.
There you go.
And it wasn't long after that I had the opportunity to interview Jim Bakker.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And Jim Bakker said this to me, because we were sitting on a couch in a hotel room, and I said, Jim, what went wrong? And this is while he was writing the book, I Was Wrong. And I'll never forget his answer. He said, Perry, 95% of my life was in order, but the 5% that I concealed from God brought down a multi-million-dollar ministry. I actually thought I had a special arrangement with God, that I could have this sin, and since he didn't zap me, so he and I kind of had it controlled, because the rest of my life was in order. Did you ever feel like that?
Absolutely. Yeah. In fact, I believe that if I worked hard enough, if I threw myself in the ministry enough, that it would offset. You know, yeah. I mean, just you're working, you're making up for the little bit of this compromise in your life with porn. You're going to make up for it with the work that you do in ministry. And so that's a really poor way of doing life.
Well,
I can tell you that.
That's the ultimate deception.
It's a major deception, but I love that definition of iniquity, the concealed sin, and that's what it is. Yeah. And I think a lot of us are driven by things that because we're trying to conceal that sin and keep it hidden.
All right, so you're in ministry and you're still struggling with this.
Yes.
What happened? When did you reach the point, all right, had enough, something's got to break here?
Well, it was a series of things. My wife became aware of it, which, again, that's so devastating for a woman. It just cuts right to the core of how a woman's created and how a woman is wired.
Yeah.
And so I never wanted that to happen. In fact, I begged God, please don't let my wife find out. And she did. I'll never forget that day.
So he answered your prayer.
Yeah. I'll never forget that day when she looked at me and said, these are the scariest words a man, like wants to hear from his wife, and that is, we need to talk. And we sat down and talked, and this is what came up. And she had gone on the computer after I had been on the computer and discovered that I had been places that I shouldn't have been. And that just broke her heart. You could just see tears welled up. And so we both cried that night. But that really began to crack the door open, so to speak. Unfortunately, I was sorry I got caught, but not sorry enough to begin the change. And she would catch me again and again and again. For the next 18 months, there was this constant catching. And it really grew to a point where the relationship was in crises. She had actually decided she was going to leave.
So she gave you an ultimatum?
I didn't know about the ultimatum. She had just decided in